Good evening, everyone. My name is Michele Storms. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the executive director at the ACLU of Washington. I'm speaking to you from the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Coast Salish people who have stewarded this land for generations. Our downtown office sits on the unceded territory of the Duwamish people. We must always remember the role our country played in the stripping Indigenous people of their land, culture, language, including the horrific, painful legacy of residential boarding schools. What we're seeing in Canada, you can be assured we will learn the same of schools here in the United States. These tragic and uncalled for losses to Indigenous people have been extreme. They are a shame and a crime that we must deal with as a nation. We recognize there is so much more work we need to do to make this country fair and just and accountable. Our Flights and Rights events are typically hosted in breweries and event spaces around the state, most often the gathering space of KEXP 90.3 FM or KEXP.org. KEXP has been an important and valued partner over these many years. I hope you'll check out their Pride programming. It's been uplifting, inspiring, and just incredibly danceable. Since many of us are still home alone, you actually really can dance like no one is watching. Just stay hydrated. Check out the chat box for a link to the music. Now, even though we aren't together in person, we do still have flights to go with your rights. If you're in the Seattle area, please visit Stoop Brewing and mention the ACLU's tab for $5 off. Details are also in the chat box and on our website. Also, everyone in attendance tonight has been entered into an ACLU of Washington Supreme Swag giveaway. Our prize package includes Pride swag and a set of KEXP and ACLU koozies. You need those koozies to help beat the heat, and you can't get them anywhere else. We'll draw names after the event and notify our 3 lucky winners by email tomorrow. Tonight, we're going to talk about LGBTQ+ rights. Now, 7 years ago, a 15-year-old named Gavin Grimm was barred from using the restroom at his high school. At age 16, Gavin sued, represented by the ACLU and the ACLU of Virginia. Just this week, we learned the Supreme Court declined to challenge Gavin's victory, and Gavin could finally say, "It's over, we won." That is a really powerful win for Gavin and for trans youth everywhere. Trans children deserve to be safe everywhere they go, including public restrooms. I want to underscore that this is the 3rd time in recent years that the Supreme Court has let appeals court decisions stand in support of transgender students. That is something to feel good about. The victories do keep coming, thank goodness for that, but so do the challenges. LGBTQ+ communities are building new ways to celebrate and demonstrate, to make space for the most historically excluded and persecuted within these communities, and to affirm what we know is true, that pride is still protest. With that in mind, I'm excited to introduce our panelists. We're going to have an amazing conversation about what pride is for all of us and what we're called upon to do in this time to truly support LGBTQ+ rights and autonomy and the beautiful ability for people to live as they are, who they love. So these 3 advocates that I'm going to share with you today are fighting the good fight day in and day out. So first we have Jaelynn Scott. Jaelynn is the executive director of the Lavender Rights Project. The Lavender Rights Project provides low-cost civil legal services and community programming centered in values of social justice for trans and queer low-income people and other marginalized communities. Jaelynn moved to the Pacific Northwest from Denver to serve as minister and director of the Unitarian Universalist Education Program. In her previous career, she's worked as director of HR, operations and education, and regularly preached and facilitated workshops on justice and mindfulness in her previous career as minister and religious educator. She's passionate about queer and trans liberation, sacred practices for self-care, decolonizing labor practices, and mindfulness in the workplace. This is our 2nd time having Jaelynn on one of our events, and we're so happy to welcome her back. Next, I'm thrilled to introduce Stacy Bass-Walden. Born in Detroit, Michigan, Stacy is the founder and director of Alki Beach Pride in West Seattle on the shores of Duwamish land. Stacy started Alki Beach Pride because she was hearing from the West Seattle LGBTQ+ and BIPOC community about the lack of or minimal representation of Black women in leadership role at nationwide Pride events. She understood the importance of her role as the founder and director of Alki Beach Pride, and so she, with the help of community volunteers, push on every year to make sure this remains an annual event to celebrate diversity, equality, and inclusion. This will be her 7th year bringing the LGBTQ+ community together to celebrate diversity and inclusion. When not organizing Alki Pride, Stacy is a 26-year seasoned massage therapist at a spa at the Hyatt Olive 8. And in her free time, Stacy enjoys spending time with her wife and 2 spoiled chihuahuas. I'm also told that Stacy's wife is spoiled. Lisa Nowlin rounds out tonight's group. Lisa is a staff attorney here at the ACLU of Washington, where she just consistently serves up justice for our clients and causes all across the state. After attending Seattle University, Lisa worked for 2 years as a volunteer coordinator with Lifelong AIDS Alliance here in Seattle. She then went to New York University Law School, during which she interned with the National ACLU LGBT and HIV Project and was a fellow. Then after law school, Lisa clerked for the Honorable Gladys Keller at the District Court for the District of Columbia and practiced with Paul Hastings and Keller Rohrbach. She joined the ACLU Washington in 2017. It's been a great 5 years with Lisa. Lisa is happy to be back in Seattle with her French bulldog, getting outdoors as much as possible. Our speakers have a lot to share with you, so let's just begin. And what I'd like to do is give each of them the opportunity to just say hello to you briefly, and then we're just gonna get into a conversation. So Jaelynn, just please come and say hello to everyone.
Hi, everyone. It's so good to be with you, Jaelynn Scott, she, her pronouns.
Stacy.
Hello, everyone. I hope everyone's staying cool. If you have AC, that's a bonus. Thank you for having me here today. I'm trying to stay cool and got the fans going.
Lisa.
Hi everyone, I'm Lisa Nowlin, she, her pronouns, and it's an honor to be here on this panel tonight. Thanks for having me.
All right, I'm so excited to begin this conversation. And I thought where I might start is with you, Jaelynn, and just asking, you know, Pride's been around for a while and people have all kinds of different ideas about what it is and what it's for. And I would love for you to share from your perspective what Pride is and why it's so important that we acknowledge and honor and celebrate Pride.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about Pride this month. And I think because of what's in the community and the news and happens around Pride and sort of the tension that exists and has existed for a long time between communities of color and white communities regarding Pride. I grew up in Mississippi and mostly in the 90s when I came out. I won't age myself and tell you what part of the 90s I'm in, but for me, Pride didn't really have much resonance. I was out, I was in Black queer community, Black trans community. We had houses, right, and balls, and just a very vibrant and active community. Especially in Mississippi, we always had our own queer clubs. We always had our own places to go to because the other clubs had never been welcoming for us. And Pride itself had always, for me, been associated with whiteness and white folks, and they received the funding and attention, and the activism was centered around white needs, mostly middle-class needs, mostly needs around marriage, not the things that we cared about necessarily, or that we needed for folks who were doing sex work on the street and people who were without a home because their families were super religious and kicked them out, right? So those were the needs that we had, and Pride represented none of that. In the Black community, there's always this sort of mix between celebration and sort of a fight for liberation, and they go hand in hand. And I think for us growing up seeing white folks celebrate Pride in a way that really excluded this fight for liberation that we were still right in the middle of, it didn't really make sense. And it took years for me to learn that actually Pride was ours and had always been ours. It was Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera. It was other Black trans folk, Black queer people who were very intentional about starting stuff around in Stonewall and actually disrupting this constant harassment from police. And so we often hear, just like with Rosa Parks and the Civil Rights Movement, there's this sense of like these actions were accidental or by chance, but there was intentional and very intelligent and very complex organizing behind the scenes. And I think it's hard for a lot of the mainstream queer community to have grasped the fact that Black folk behind the scenes, working with civil rights leaders, working with, across the line from trans and queer community, were organizing for that point of disruption in 1969. And so that's actually our history. It's a history of organizing. It's a history of Black intellectuals. It's a history of Black trans women leading fiercely and fighting, and also at the same time, like dancing their asses off while they do it, right? So that is our history. And so for me now, Pride is something completely different. It's what I aspire to live into, which is all of those people fighting with their very lives and being not only proud about who they are, but celebrating and finding joy in those moments. It's an aspirational thing for me to actually hold this type of pride now.
I love that. And I really appreciate you just acknowledging the way in which you didn't think pride was yours and then realized it was 100% yours. And now just really seeking to fully embody that, right? So I'm very appreciative of that. And I want to go to Stacy, because one of the things that you had said was just seeing an absence of Black women in leadership around Pride, and then that being one of the things that kind of spurred you on. And I'm wondering a lot of things about that, like why you think that is, why you think it's important for someone like you to take some leadership of Pride events. Yeah, so what would you like to say about that?
Jaelynn said quite a bit that you're making it really easy for me to jump on that question. That over the years of going to different prides, you don't see someone of my color behind the scenes or in the front of the scenes. You just don't. For me personally, going to the prides, you would see male, white, running things, and the audience and the entertainment, almost like it was geared for them. And our event kind of just cultivated naturally because our friends wanted to come and be around similar folks that look like us. And at that point in time, it was just friends. It wasn't a public event, just a bunch of folks gathering on the beach. And there were several of my friends that said, you need to keep doing this. And when I would ask questions, like, well, what do you mean I need to keep doing this? They said, well, think about the prides that you've gone to. Think about what it looked like when you look around the room or the park or the club. It didn't look like myself. And so being a Black woman, founding this event, learning how to run an event. As you said in the introduction, I'm a massage therapist, so everything in my world had to do with relaxing and staying calm. And learning the event side of it is on the stressful side, but I have listened to friends explain how important it is to keep on with this event, because if I don't do it, if I step back, the vision is going to change. So we keep pushing. We want to maintain the diverseness that we have put together and keep building on that. That's why I think it's important to remain the face of Alki Beach Pride. It's just, there aren't that many. Houston Pride was one that I actually met someone 2 years ago that it was the executive director. And when I had a small chat with her, she said that was the first time that you saw that, a woman of color being in that leadership role. And she had a lot to say about that, but there's things I'd have to filter on bleeping out. But I made sure that I listened to what the public said. I listened to the community, my friends, and I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I'll keep struggling through the permits and all the struggles that go along with hosting an event to make this equal. That's the key, is make it equal.
Right. So I'm actually going to stay with you for a moment, Stacy, because another thing that I think is a really powerful feature about Alki Beach Pride in particular is that it is just fully a community-centered, volunteer-centered event. So it's my understanding you haven't taken any sort of corporate sponsorship dollars or anything like that. And I'm curious about why that's been important to you not to do that, and maybe like what's gained by that and maybe what's lost by that.
Sure. I'll start with what's lost by that first is funding. I know there's a battle where folks will say, you know, prides have become corporate, kind of taken over, so to speak. But on the flip side, I understand that every piece of equipment that you rent, it all costs money. And some of those corporate places step up for whatever reason, shine in the light or something like that. But we have not done that. I don't know if we're on their radar quite yet, but when they come, we will still kind of steer away from that and keep it within the community. Small bank branches, local breweries, things that still make it feel like this is for the community, about the community, and not about, you know, putting a pride flag on a logo, you know, for that month of June. It's not about that. But on the flip side, in order to keep the events going, we do need to figure out some way of funding. And we're still growing. We're not necessarily a 501c3 status. So every year we are kind of looking for someone to step up and help us out to create the vision that I've had and to keep it going. So small community, less corporate, you know, when corporate does start, you know, emailing us, and keep it that family community feeling.
Thank you. So Lisa, you heard Jaelynn talk about pride as protest, right? And the roots of pride and what that's all about. And it's not like LGBTQ plus liberation has been achieved, right? So that is present. And then you've heard Stacy talk about, you know, well, corporate dollars for whatever reason, you know, we've steered clear of that. So I've heard you talk about the commodification of pride, and I wonder if you could say more about what you mean by that and what concerns you have.
Yeah, I think Jaelynn captured it so succinctly when she said that, you know, pride is celebration and liberation, right? That they go hand in hand, and that's what pride is. And what we've been seeing a lot lately is the focusing on the celebration part, and, you know, and the capitalizing and making the profiting off of the celebration part, right? Like there's been this rainbow washing of pride where you can buy rainbow anything, and it's about, companies making money off of pride. But they're making money off of the celebration without investing in the liberation. And that's a problem, that you can't separate the two in those ways. And you see organizations and companies, shouting pride, and we celebrate pride. For example, ICE posted on social media celebrating pride, but they're not about liberation, and they're not about the liberation of all LGBTQ people, right? That they're overlooking the intersectionality there, that a lot of LGBTQ people are still being oppressed, that ICE oppresses a lot of LGBTQ people. And so ICE doesn't get to celebrate pride and overlook the liberation part. And so that's what's concerning, is that the community and the kind of corporate structure is focusing on celebrating pride, of selling rainbow items, but losing sight of the liberation side. That is really what pride is about. And there's still so much work to be done, and so much work to be done to liberate our entire community, right? Not just the white people that Jaelynn and Stacy were talking about that you see at so many pride events. And so how do we bring pride back to a celebration, because that's a wonderful aspect of pride, but also putting just as much effort into the liberation of our entire community.
That is really beautifully said. So that makes me want to jump back to Jaelynn, because I think that you have some ideas about, all right, so corporate folks, if you want to celebrate, here's what we need from you. And I'd love for you to just say a little bit more about, like, kind of what's the ethics of that? What's the give and take? What's the accountability piece?
I love what Lisa said. They're invested in the celebration side, but not the liberation. It's perfect. And thinking about Stacy and this conflict coming up with, here you are, Black-led femme woman organizer, and all of these other prides, right, that have existed in the space that you had to fight to get into and to hold well, like they can take the corporate sponsors. But now that we come to some point of wanting some reconciliation, some maybe even reparations of these corporations and getting them out of pride and being accountable and ethical, well, the impact falls on you, right? Because that's normally what happens. Like, we as Black women, we have to take the brunt of what's going on in the system. And that's not quite fair either. And so my thinking is, I think we all have to wrestle with the ethics of corporate sponsorship, but I want to give a whole lot of room for Black community and Black leaders, Black organizers, and other POC organizers, and executive directors, in that, could you take those monies, right, that you have invested in corporate sponsorship, for commercials and major prides in major cities and et cetera, just so you can actually make profit off of it, right? Could you give up that profit and invest them in Black community? Could you actually, since there's a conversation that started, I don't know if everyone watching knows, in Seattle with a local community who is sponsoring an alternative Black Pride. And then some folks who had an issue with that and not a great analysis on why their funding model and their structure was good. But there was a conversation about reparations that came up. And I think this is another area where we could actually talk about reparations. All the harm done in the investment in corporate pride and the taking away from Black LGBTQ persons that happened in that model, and also the erasure of our stories. There's something owed to us. So before these major corporations, before they take their toys and go, I want to say, hold up one second. We still need that funding, but we need it in the communities that you have erased for so many years. And we're not just going to celebrate with those funds. That's the point. Like, we will actually invest in the liberation of our people, because that's what we do when you give us money, because we need it, because there's scarcity in our community. So I think the model for me is, don't just withdraw because you're getting flack about being a corporate sponsor of Pride, reinvest those funds back into our community, Black-led organizations, Black-led community groups, sponsoring Pride events and doing the work of liberation.
Yeah, so I'm deeply appreciative of that. And I almost want to invite you to take it a little bit further. And Stacy and Lisa, you can weigh in on this too, because when you're talking about putting money back in the community, so I think about, LGBTQ plus people who are houseless, right? Or who are dealing with other kinds of issues. So those are areas where often there's not as much funding as there is for non-LGBTQ plus people, or maybe not as much funding specifically for Black or Two-Spirit or other people of color or immigrant communities within the LGBTQ plus community. So what does that look like? Is it about, sort of funding and supporting those kinds of things, or take the next step? Because I think it'd be really great, right, for corporations to be thinking about, all right, how are we gonna do a deeper investment in these communities?
And Lisa and Stacy, I'm going to step back in a minute, but I'm hearing you ask a question of like what is the liberation work, right? And what is the work we really need them to invest in? I mean, in my own community, Black trans women and femmes are the target of violence, and the numbers of our deaths and murders and brutal murders, rates of homelessness are just, it's out of this world and impossible to hold emotionally as I think about the state of our community. And I believe that there is an epidemic of violence facing our community. And if we want to think about protecting the LGBTQ community, we should consider who are the most marginal in the community, who's suffering the most. I would say, Indigenous, Two-Spirit, Black trans women and femmes, and just the rates of violence and homelessness and the outcomes for them. And so what would it mean to take a different approach and center those people's needs in your funding of the LGBTQ community? What would that mean to center that in your advocacy for LGBTQ community and be loud about that? Like, how much money would that actually bring in when people see that you've actually put your money behind your values and your ethics? That for me would be the liberation fund, the funding for the liberation that we need.
And thank you so much for elevating that issue about violence, because it is extreme. And it's something that, anytime whoever the most marginalized group, whatever the most group that's been made most marginalized by society's ideas of norms, right? All those things is always going to be most subject to violence, most subject to hunger, to so many other things. And when we lift up the people who have been made most marginalized, it actually makes things better for everyone, right? So I feel like that's kind of what you've just put out there for us. And Stacy, I'd love for you to add to that as someone who is stepping up and having a particular vision for what your Pride is going to look like, and what genuine support that you would want to take, right, would look like.
Well, Jaelynn nailed it 100% on that. It's hard for me to speak about what corporate dollars would look like because I don't have that experience working with corporations yet. I am going to switch it over to side note with when I organize events, I'm seeming to have a struggle every year with getting fairness on the permit portion of it. And what I mean by that is filling out the permit and being denied every year to set up on the sand, for example. And then to see other events be able to do just that. And they're not brown. I'll just say that. It's a tough thing for me to see that inequality.
So like, what is the impact on you, right? As this Black woman organizer, like what does that end up doing for you, to you?
I tell you, a couple of years ago, it physically affected me where, my body just wanted to seize up, some panic attacks, restful nights, questioning, am I doing the right thing? Why am I getting denied? And having photos of other events happening, beer gardens on the sand. It has brought up major anxiety for me because I feel like it's personal. I don't know if Parks has issues with LGBTQ events. All I know is that each year I get denied to do a setup. And when I mean setup, it could be the bare minimal of a 10 by 10 canopy on the sand. And then to get the permit back saying denied because the canopy is on the sand. It has made me want to actually, fold and not do the event anymore. It's super, super, super stressful. I feel like I've been giving all these roadblocks, hurdles. It's super stressful. It leaves me with a big question mark of, well, why can't I not do this for the community? This is a public event, a community event. And each year I get told no, in big, bold letters, absolutely no setup on the sand. But like I mentioned, to see a beer garden, a huge beer garden set up on the sand, right next to an RCW sign saying no liquor on the sand. And I've lived over here for quite a few years. So I have documented, I've collected all of my photos, and then I just sit with that information of, well, if they can do it, why can't we? If a pole vaulting thing can happen for several years on the sand, why can't we have a 10 by 10 canopy? Why can't we have a stage? Why are we getting no, absolutely do not set up on the sand? So that was a long answer to your question, but what is it doing to me? It's stressing me out. It's making me anxious. It's, some depression set in there. And then I sit with that until the next year of, planning the event and having, folks say, well, why don't you do that? Why don't you do a beer garden? Why don't you do this? And then I have to find a way to answer them gently and saying, well, we're not allowed to. There's so much more I could say on that, but I can feel my heart racing just talking about it.
Right. And thank you for that. And thank you for that honesty and vulnerability. And certainly in asking the question, it wasn't my intention to get your heart rate up, but I do feel like the lack of equity in your example that you've shared is really powerful, and is something that we absolutely need to be looking at. You have as much right as anybody, right, to put on an event, and maybe more right in some respects. And so I'm going to sit with that for a little bit, and then I think come back to Lisa for a moment, because you had said it so eloquently before. Celebration, yes, but liberation, yes. And I think what Stacy's talking about, what Jaelynn is talking about, it's all right there. Well, you're also a lawyer, Lisa, and you have worked on a lot of really amazing cases. And I wonder if you could talk about some of the things that you've seen through that legal work, and that we have either accomplished or that we're trying to accomplish in the direction of liberation. Because if you can't get it on the streets, your companion is your lawyer. So tell us more.
And first I want to just say, Stacy, let's connect after this at some point and chat about that permit. And I think as we just saw with the chalk art permit, You know, it's Seattle's track record on permitting equity is not great. So let's talk some more about that. And I also quickly wanted to touch on, you know, kind of that corporate investment in liberation, and just, I think I'm feeling less optimistic about that. I don't think, you know, the corporations are involved in Pride because they care about the liberation. I think they're there to make money. And so I just don't feel too optimistic that that's where they're going to put the money at unless it benefits them. And I think one way for it to benefit them is if our community demands that they invest in the liberation part. And I don't think the LGBTQ community has been doing a good job of prioritizing that for, you know, the marginalized people within our community, right? So for Black trans women, for, you know, Two-Spirit people, for people who are unhoused. And so until we as the LGBTQ community start doing that, why in the world would the corporations do it? And so I think, you know, that's our responsibility that we really need to focus on and demand that. So that's that quick aside. But, you know, as far as the legal work, you know, it's kind of our last resort, right? Like so much of the work happens through organizing and the people on the ground and trying to make changes in a lot of ways. And when that doesn't work, we can sue somebody. And so, you know, one case that we're looking at right now, and we issued a demand letter recently, is with regards to Alaska Airlines uniform policy for flight attendants. And the airline industry is one of the few industries that still has, you know, separate uniforms depending on your sex that are really clearly based on sex stereotypes. And so we wrote a letter to Alaska Airlines on behalf of a non-binary flight attendant, because, you know, if you're non-binary, what uniform do you wear? There's the male uniform and the female uniform, and neither one is right, and you're not allowed to mix and match. And I think this situation is also a great instance, an example of how working towards, you know, LGBTQ liberation and justice benefits everyone. You know, these uniform policies harm everyone, not just non-binary folks or queer folks, right? Like the women who are required to wear, you know, these low-cut shirts, who aren't allowed to roll up their sleeves when the men are, and, you know, have to wear a heel of a certain size, are harmed by that policy. And the men who, you know, aren't allowed to wear, who are only allowed to wear one earring when the women can wear two, is one example, or, you know, are limited in their uniforms, are also harmed. Looked like I just cut out and froze, so sorry. Okay. So we, you know, our argument to Alaska Airlines is this policy is discriminatory. You're discriminating on the basis of gender expression against our non-binary client, but also against the men and the women that you employ. And so we think that that's prohibited under the Washington law against discrimination, and also federal law. And so, you know, we're in conversation with Alaska Airlines right now, but, you know, it may be that a lawsuit's required. And so, you know, you can't force a non-binary person to, you know, have to choose a male uniform or a female uniform when they don't identify as either. And this work that we're doing is benefiting everybody.
That is powerful and so important. And, you know, when you say the thing about the rolling up of the sleeves or the one earring versus two, it really does point out that's just not a thing.
It's just silly.
And so, yeah, exactly. I don't even know what to do with that. So thank you for your advocacy, because it's powerful. Because once again, as you said, what you do on behalf of this client who's non-binary actually is a benefit for everyone. As we've said before, what you do on behalf of people who've been made marginalized by whatever societal circumstance actually leads to everyone's liberation. So Black trans liberation is everyone's liberation. But if without the Black trans liberation, like, we don't get it. You know, everybody doesn't get it. And that's a message that I always just wish people understood more, that we think about that. We think about who's not getting equity, who's not getting what they need. And when they get what they need, we're just all going to be better off. Well, okay, so we're still, even though there's light at the end of the tunnel, we are still in a pandemic, right? And COVID has an impact on the face of like all things. It's like why we're all on a Zoom screen doing our flights and rights instead of at physically KEXP Brewery. And obviously, some advantages are that we have people watching from all over the state and not just right in Seattle. So that's a good thing. But then also we're not together. So I'm wondering about, some of the impact on Pride that you've seen this year and last year related to that. I see that Alki Beach Pride will be in person later this summer. That's really exciting. But what are some of the impacts you've seen? Maybe Stacy, we can start with you and then give others of you a chance to weigh in if you have something to say.
Yes. So last year, and we're going to continue with it this year, the impact from COVID has, we made the smart choice not to have in-person large crowd events. We are having a 2-day event. The first day, August 14th, will be a sort of a car parade, a caravan around the Alki area and up towards some of the other businesses, giving them kind of a showcasing some of the other LGBTQ owned businesses here. Then all of the businesses will have specials for the entire weekend. I believe we're coining it as Love Win specials. It's possible we'll have an outdoor movie night on the 15th. Then also on the 15th, we'll have something which we're calling Rolling Out, which will be bikes, roller skates, really fun roller skating community is going to lead us out. It was something that the community wanted to continue having a Pride event of some sort. There was a need to feel something good, with all the things we're hearing in the news. There was a need to have something feel good happening. So we made the decision to do a car parade and roll out to give the community something exciting and positive to look forward to. And it was so successful last year that they asked us to do it again. So we will do it again. Next year, we'll hopefully be back to our normal type of programming where we'll have some sort of stage with entertainment and guest speakers, things like that.
That's fantastic. And I know that we've put the information in the chat box with the details on all the events coming up that weekend. It's going to be a great weekend. Jaelynn, did you have anything to add about the sort of impact of the pandemic and what that means for Pride?
It's interesting. I think in many ways, this sort of need for a revival of Pride, a fresh look, a recentering on the needs of Black and Indigenous folk, like that sort of amped up during the pandemic. And it may just be, we have, some of us have a little more time and flexibility in terms of the ability to organize. I mean, that's a theory, I don't know. Also the discontent that, something about being able to slow down and facing death and seeing those around us get sick and die, and the immediacy and the importance of now and this moment in life. Like we're thinking a little bit different and acting a bit different. And I think we saw with George Floyd and also the resulting Black Trans Lives Matter movement and visibility that followed. We're thinking different, and we're a little less patient. We're a little less patient on the job, right? We're a little less patient with the police, a lot less patient. We are less patient, and we feel like now's the time to act. I think I'm a minister, so I think a lot about death and the importance and immediacy of this very moment, and maybe that's a piece of it. But that seems to have happened. And so what I'm watching now in the Black community is not only in Seattle, but all over the country, there are these, we've always had these marginal or in the margins, we've always organized and gotten together for our own Pride festivities, even if it wasn't in June. We had our months, we had our places that we all could go to, but now we're bringing that stuff out in the public realm, and we're speaking truth to power and telling the old prides, like, this does not work for us, and we are the ones, and we're taking over. And so I think there's an impatience with the status quo now that has happened over the pandemic. And we see the importance of liberation now for our Black trans siblings, the importance of having the events that we want to be at that fully include us, that we're in leadership with. So it's strangely been a positive effect in terms of the movement. Yeah, and I think that might be some of it. It might be some of, like, we're impatient to live our life fully the way that we want to.
That's really beautiful. And, you know, anytime our mortality is in front of us, it can lead to a little bit of impatience to, all right, let's get this thing done that we want to get done. So very appreciative of that. So I have a last question for everyone. But before I go there, I just think there's one other little sort of law tidbit I want to hit on, because it just seems like every year around this time, in June, like some major US Supreme Court case comes down, and this year has been no different. And there might be some people who came here today and we're hoping that they might hear something about Fulton versus the city of Philadelphia. And so Lisa, if you would just give a little bit of like what that was. And I think, you know, with that decision, what it means for the LGBTQ plus community, and also like where the light is in that, like so anyway, I'm gonna let you do that.
Yeah, thanks, Michele. So Fulton v. City of Philadelphia was with regard to a Catholic social services organization that Philadelphia had contracted with to do foster care work. And this organization did not take same-sex couples for foster placement and refused to, in violation of City of Philadelphia's non-discrimination policy. And so when Philly terminated that contract, the Catholic Social Services organization sued. And, you know, what's really concerning about this case is that there's, you know, it's posited as this tension between, you know, free exercise of religion and non-discrimination laws. And, you know, this isn't, you know, the government saying, you know, Catholic social services, you can't do what you want to do on your own time and money. This is them saying you can't use our money to discriminate in this way. And surprisingly, the Supreme Court issued a unanimous decision. It was a narrow one, but in favor of the Catholic social services, and saying, and it was, you know, the legal issue there is narrow, and it has to do with this case called Smith, which says that, you know, neutral, generally applicable government or laws don't burden religious exercise. And what the court here said was, well, because the director of, you know, Department of Human Services has discretion to make exceptions, it's not a general law. And then so they sent it back on that basis, because they said Smith was not applicable. But what's really concerning here is, you know, some of the concurrences that say that they want to change Smith, and to kind of set up a system where, you know, these non-discrimination laws that apply generally to everybody can be viewed as burdening religion, and that there'll be exceptions to them. And so I think this, you know, we need to keep our eye on this, because it's going to be it is already a big issue, and will continue to be one of this tension of, you know, how far does religion get to dictate what they're able to do, and how much can government say this is, you know, a general rule that benefits the entire population, and you don't get to just have a religious exemption toward it. And you know, and it's not just about, again, not just about LGBTQ people, right? What if the Catholic agency said, well, we're not going to place foster children with anyone who is, you know, Muslim or Jewish or vice versa, right? If it was you know, a Jewish agency saying that, and all of a sudden we're creating this world where, you know, some people can get service, some people can't, right? We're seeing this with the flower shop here in Washington, or the cake shop in Colorado. Is when do you get to say, like, I'm not going to serve you because of my religious beliefs? And it's going to be a big issue. It's concerning with the Supreme Court. Right now, the flower shop case here in Washington that our Supreme Court has ruled on twice is up before the Supreme Court to see if they'll take it. There's a chance that they might. So this could be coming home to Washington really quickly. And I just encourage you all to keep an eye on it and to stay engaged in that conversation, because it's, I think, could change the legal landscape drastically, and change LGBTQ rights drastically and the rights of all people.
Well, and needless to say, we'll be at it tooth and nail, right? To protect the rights of LGBTQ plus persons and all persons, right? Like that freedom is important, and discrimination is not something that we should allow. There's a strong jurisprudence on that as well. So we've got to thread that needle properly, and I know we'll continue to fight to do so. So as we wrap up, I'll invite each of you to offer a reflection on what a truly inclusive Pride would look like. That, again, to coin the words from earlier, embraces both the celebration and the liberation. So I'm going to start with Stacy. I'll go to Lisa, and I'll give Jaelynn the last word before I close out. Stacy?
What does a truly inclusive Pride look like to me? Wow. Blended, just blended, very blended. Getting all of the communities together. I have a dream of really getting all of the organizations out to the beach to celebrate, be seen, full diversity, full inclusion, and equality.
That's a good dream. Lisa?
That's a tough question. I mean, I think it looks like liberation every day, not just in June, right? That means that all of the Black trans women who've been murdered get to live and get to go to this event. It means that, you know, the trans youth get to access healthcare and play sports. It means, you know, the gay couples in Philadelphia can foster children without worrying which agency they have to go to. It means that, you know, we passed federal legislation that says you can't get fired for being LGBT. And so I think it means liberation in all of the months and not just June. And yeah, I think we've got a long ways to go for that. But I think that's what Pride means, is that when June comes, we can just celebrate because we've done the liberation part already.
Yeah, for me, I think I'm with you. It's year long, and it becomes the heart of organizing for the community. It is deeply rooted in mutual aid, and you know, Sylvia Rivera's work and Marsha P. Johnson's name, and Stormy DeRivery, their names are on our lips at all times. And we don't forget that people that look like them, that identify in the way that they do, Latinx, Indigenous, Two-Spirit, Black, trans people are the sacred holders of our community, and we lift them up in leadership, and we pay them what they deserve to be paid, and we protect them. Yeah, that's ideal Pride for me.
Well, I thank you so much, each of you. And I certainly feel inspired and rededicated to that pride, So, oh gosh, what do I need to say to close out? I want to remind people about the Stoop Brewing, and take advantage of the opportunity to get a credit and get your flight. And I want to remind folks to save the date for the next Flights and Rights, which is July 27th, because we're going to be talking about the systemic equality agenda work that we're doing, this campaign that we're a part of, and I'm really excited to share that with all of you. I want to remind you to mark your calendar for Alki Beach Pride, August 14th and 15th. Let's be there to support that beautiful Black woman-led event and help build that inclusive, blended, beautiful moment where we're all out on the beach together. And so again, I thank each of you for the work that you do, for the vision that you hold, and for the beautiful humans that you are. And to our audience, I thank you so much always for your support. We're grateful for you, your continued pride, your continued resilience. So everyone have a wonderful evening. It's a little cooler than yesterday, so hopefully everybody can stay cool and take good care. Thanks everyone, bye-bye.